I never imagined that selling my used laptop on Craigslist would lead to a night I'd never forget. It all started on a cool October evening when I posted a detailed ad and received an immediate response from a serious buyer. His messages were polite at first, asking routine questions about the item's condition. We arranged to meet at a busy coffee shop in a safe part of town. I felt reassured by the public setting, until he suggested we finalize the deal in a quieter parking lot just a few blocks away. Something about that request unsettled me, but I brushed it off as overcautious caution from a buyer eager to negotiate. After the coffee shop meeting, I drove to the agreed-upon parking lot, a dimly lit stretch away from the bustling center. The air was cool, and the street was nearly empty. I parked my car and waited near the trunk, where I had securely packed the laptop in its case. Minutes later, a nondescript sedan pulled up. The buyer stepped out, a man in a dark jacket with sunglasses that hid his eyes even in the fading light. We exchanged a brief nod, and he inspected the item with an intensity that made my skin crawl. As he handed me cash in exchange for the laptop, his demeanor shifted abruptly. He leaned in, his voice low and urgent. "I need a favor. Could you help me with something?" Before I could protest, he snatched the cash from my hand, shoving it into his pocket. The friendly facade dropped, replaced by a hard, predatory stare. My instinct screamed that something was terribly wrong. I attempted to back away, but he was faster, closing the distance with a single, swift movement. In that terrifying moment, he lunged at me, his hand snatching at my wallet and phone. A struggle erupted in the dim light of the nearly deserted lot. I felt a searing pain as I was shoved against my car. With a burst of adrenaline, I managed to twist away, wrenching my arm free from his grasp even as I caught a glimpse of the desperation in his eyes. My heart hammered as I fumbled for my phone to dial 911, but before I could, he delivered a forceful blow that sent me sprawling onto the cold asphalt. Dazed and injured, I crawled toward my car, my vision blurring with pain and shock. The attacker, realizing his plan was unraveling, cursed and bolted toward his sedan. I mustered the last of my strength, dragging myself behind the car for cover as I tried to catch my breath. The lot was eerily silent, no sirens, no witnesses, just me, battered and terrified, and the echo of his retreating footsteps in the night. It wasn't until dawn that I managed to stand and call a friend for a ride to the hospital. I never saw the man again, and the police later found only a few scuffed tire marks and a discarded cigarette butt near the lot. Though I survived that harrowing encounter on my own, I now live with a lingering fear every time I open a Craigslist ad, wondering if the next transaction might bring danger too close to home. Before we start with the second story, please show your support by liking this video and subscribe to the channel. Also, please comment down your city from where you are watching this video. Story 2. When I needed a place to live on short notice, I turned to Craigslist, desperate to find an affordable apartment. The ad seemed too good to be true, a charming 2-bedroom in a quiet part of Seattle, available immediately. The landlord was vague about details, but the price was unbeatable. I arranged to meet a representative that evening, and by all appearances, everything seemed normal. I toured the apartment, a modest, clean space with friendly neighbors in the hallway, and decided to sign a short-term lease on the spot. For the first few weeks, life in the apartment was uneventful. I enjoyed the quiet comfort of my new home, convinced I had made the right choice. Then, strange things began to happen. It started with inexplicable noises, soft knocks in the middle of the night, creaking floorboards when I was alone, and the sensation of a presence in the hallway. I assumed it was just an overactive imagination or the quirks of an older building. One night, while working late in my home office, I heard a quiet, measured tapping at my door. Assuming it might be my landlord or a neighbor, I cautiously opened the door. There, standing in the dimly lit corridor, was a man in a plain t-shirt and jeans with an unreadable expression. He introduced himself as my new roommate. I was taken aback. I hadn't agreed to share the apartment. Before I could ask any questions, he simply said, "I'm here now," and stepped inside, closing the door behind him with an unsettling finality. Over the following days, I tried to adjust to his silent presence. He never spoke unless spoken to, moved about the apartment at odd hours, and was oddly possessive of common spaces. My unease grew as I found personal items misplaced and saw shadows moving in places I didn't expect. One evening, I confronted him about the mysterious behavior, only to receive a cold, evasive reply. It was as if he was guarding secrets I was not meant to know. The tension reached a breaking point one stormy night. I was alone in the apartment when I heard shouts and the sound of furniture being dragged across the floor. My heart pounded as I bolted into the living room, only to see him standing by the window, his back turned. Suddenly, I heard a loud crash at the front door. The intruder had broken in. Panicked, I fumbled for my phone and dialed 911, my voice trembling as I reported the break-in. Within minutes, the sound of sirens cut through the storm. Police officers burst into the apartment, their flashlights revealing a chaotic scene, the front door splintered open, and a masked man attempting to force his way through. In the ensuing struggle, the intruder managed to break away, fleeing into the rain-soaked night. The officers quickly turned their attention to my roommate. Under questioning, he remained eerily calm, offering little explanation for his strange behavior. It soon emerged that he had been living in the apartment for weeks before I arrived, illegally subletting the space under a forged identity. His plan was not to harm me, but to use my lease as a cover for his own unsavory activities. The police took him into custody, and I was left reeling, trying to piece together the unsettling truth. That night, as the rain continued to fall and the apartment grew silent once more, I realized I had narrowly escaped a situation that could have cost me dearly. The experience left me with a deep mistrust of the digital marketplace and a constant reminder that sometimes the greatest dangers come from the people you never truly know. Story 3. I was desperate for work when I responded to a Craigslist ad for a lucrative work-from-home position. The ad was straightforward, promising flexible hours and generous pay for simple administrative tasks. I exchanged emails with the employer, a friendly, persuasive individual who insisted on a quick interview over the phone. Everything seemed legitimate, the company had a professional website, and the payment terms were laid out clearly. Eager to secure a much-needed income, I accepted the offer without hesitation. On the day of the interview, I set up my small home office and dialed in at the scheduled time. The conversation started normally, but soon the tone shifted. The employer began asking personal questions that felt invasive, details about my daily routine, my financial struggles, even my home address. At first, I brushed it off as part of a thorough vetting process, but as the call continued, a nagging sense of dread crept in. The interviewer's tone became more intense, and his questions took on an edge that I couldn't ignore. After the call, I received an email instructing me to come to a local address for what was described as final training. The location turned out to be a nondescript office building in a rundown part of town. Reluctantly, I drove there, my nerves on edge. When I arrived, the building was dimly lit, and the reception area was nearly empty. I signed in at the front desk, but there was no one there to greet me, only a faint hum of a computer and the sound of my own footsteps echoing on the tile floor. I waited in the lobby for what felt like an eternity. Then, a man in a business suit appeared, his smile too wide, his eyes cold and calculating. He led me down a narrow corridor, explaining that this was the training phase where I would learn the ins and outs of the job. The further we walked, the more the atmosphere turned oppressive. I noticed other individuals in the room, silent, withdrawn, their expressions blank. They sat at rows of old computers, eyes fixed on the screens, as if entranced. As the session began, I realized with mounting horror that the tasks were not what I'd been promised. Instead of legitimate administrative work, I was given vague instructions that involved handling sensitive data, and the tone of the meeting grew increasingly coercive. When I expressed my concerns, the man's smile vanished, replaced by a steely glare. "You're here because you're needed," he said firmly, "and you'll do as you're told." Panic welled up inside me. I attempted to leave, but the exit doors were locked, and a pair of individuals stepped forward, blocking my path with quiet menace. In that moment of desperation, I recalled the phone in my pocket. My hands shook as I dialed 911, whispering my location and pleading for help. The building's intercom crackled with a distorted voice as the door behind me suddenly swung open. In the chaos that ensued, I managed to push past the line of silent figures and sprint down the hallway, heart pounding as I fumbled with the door. Finally, I burst out onto the street into the cold night air. I didn't see any police that night, my escape was mine alone. I ran until the building was a distant, ominous silhouette against the city lights. Bruised, shaken, and with a deep sense of violation, I found refuge in a nearby diner. The ordeal left me with a gnawing distrust of online job offers and a lingering uncertainty about who I had truly encountered that night. I survived, but the memory of that forced training session and the oppressive feeling of entrapment continues to haunt me, a stark reminder that not every opportunity is what it seems, and sometimes the price of a quick fix can be far too high.